The massive ships appeared without warning above Earth's moon. They were huge, dark metal things that blocked out stars and cast shadows across the lunar surface. Each ship was the size of a small city, covered in spikes and strange symbols that seemed to glow with their own light. There were 12 of them, arranged in a perfect circle around Earth's only natural satellite. On Earth, every government went into panic mode. Emergency meetings started in every capital city. Military bases went to high alert. Scientists pointed their telescopes at the alien fleet and tried to figure out what they were looking at. The ships just sat there, silent and threatening, for 3 whole days. Then the message came. It arrived on every radio frequency, every television channel, every computer screen, and every phone on the planet at exactly the same time. The voice was deep and serious, speaking perfect English with an accent that sounded almost British. "Primitive beings of the third planet," the voice began. "You now face the might of the hegemonic empire of Zarthul. We are your superiors in every way. Our technology is beyond your understanding. Our military power is absolute. Our intelligence is vast beyond your tiny minds." In the hastily built command center in Geneva, world leaders and scientists watched the transmission on dozens of screens. The alien speaking was tall and thin, with purple skin and 4 arms. Its head was larger than a human's, with 3 eyes arranged in a triangle. It wore elaborate robes covered in medals and symbols of rank. "I am Ambassador Kethvar," the alien continued, "speaker for the Supreme Council of Conquest. We have dominated 847 star systems. Countless species have bowed before our superiority. Entire civilizations have surrendered at the mere sight of our fleet." Dr. Sarah Chen, a xenobiologist from Stanford University, was taking notes on her tablet. She had been chosen to lead the scientific response team because she knew more about possible alien life than almost anyone on Earth. But as she listened to the ambassador's speech, something strange was happening to her face. Her mouth was twitching. Her eyes were getting watery. She was trying very hard not to smile. "We do not negotiate," Ambassador Kethvar went on. "We do not bargain. We do not show mercy to those who resist. Your planet will submit to the glory of the Empire, or it will be reduced to cosmic dust. You have precisely 72 of your Earth hours to surrender unconditionally." The transmission ended. The command center was completely silent for a long moment. Everyone was staring at the screens, trying to process what they had just heard. The Secretary General of the United Nations opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, Dr. Chen made a sound. It started as a small snort. Then it became a giggle. Then she was laughing so hard that tears ran down her face. She doubled over in her chair, holding her stomach, making snorting sounds as she tried to catch her breath. "Dr. Chen," the Secretary General said, looking worried, "are you having some kind of breakdown?" "I'm sorry," she gasped between laughs. "I'm so sorry. It's just..." "Did you hear what he said? 847 star systems? And they're giving us 3 days to surrender?" General Morrison, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, frowned at her. "This is hardly the time for humor, Doctor. We're facing an existential threat to our species." No, you don't understand," Dr. Chen said, wiping her eyes with a tissue. "This is amazing. This is the best news we could have gotten. How is an alien invasion good news?" asked the British Prime Minister. Dr. Chen stood up and walked to the main screen, which still showed the frozen image of Ambassador Kethvar in all his alien glory. "Look at him," she said. "Really look at him. Look at those robes. Look at all those medals. Look at how he's standing." Everyone in the room stared at the screen. The alien ambassador was standing very straight, with his 4 arms crossed in what was clearly meant to be an impressive pose. His robes were covered in so many decorations that he looked like a Christmas tree. His expression was the kind of serious, dramatic look that actors made in old movies. "He looks like he's posing for a painting." Dr. Chen continued, "Everything about this is ceremonial. The perfect formation of ships. The formal speech. The dramatic timing. Even the threat sounds like it came from a script." "What are you saying?" asked the Secretary General. "I'm saying these aren't conquerors," Dr. Chen said, still fighting back giggles. "These are bureaucrats playing dress-up. They've probably been using the same speech for centuries, the same tactics, the same everything." She pulled up her tablet and started typing rapidly. "Think about it. 847 star systems sounds impressive, right? But how many species are we talking about? If they've been expanding for thousands of years and they've only conquered that many systems, they're either very slow or very bad at it. Professor Williams from Oxford University, who had been quietly listening, suddenly sat up straighter. Dr. Chen might be onto something, he said. The language patterns in that speech were very rigid, very formal, like a religious ceremony or a legal document. Plus, Dr. Chen added, they gave us 3 days to surrender. Who does that? If you want to conquer someone, you attack. You don't give them time to prepare unless what? Asked General Morrison. Unless you've never had to fight anyone who could actually fight back, Dr. Chen finished. Unless every species you've encountered just rolled over and gave up the moment they saw your ships. The room was quiet again, but this time it was thoughtful silence instead of terrified silence. People were starting to see what Dr. Chen was seeing. The alien ambassador had looked impressive, sure, but now that they thought about it, he had also looked somewhat fake, like someone playing a role. So, what do we do? Asked the Secretary General. Dr. Chen grinned. We respond, of course, but maybe not the way they're expecting. She walked over to the communication console and started setting up a return transmission. I think we should be polite, professional, maybe ask a few questions. What kind of questions? Asked General Morrison suspiciously. Oh, you know, Dr. Chen said, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Basic diplomatic stuff, how their empire works, what their military doctrine is like, their rules of engagement, that sort of thing. She finished setting up the transmission equipment and looked around the room. Anyone have any objections to me handling this? The world leaders looked at each other. None of them had a better idea. The aliens had demanded surrender, but they had also opened a communication channel. Maybe talking was better than shooting. Go ahead, Doctor, said the Secretary General. But please try to be diplomatic. Dr. Chen nodded seriously, but there was still a smile playing around the corners of her mouth. She activated the transmission and looked directly into the camera. Greetings, Ambassador Kethvar of the hegemonic empire of Zarthul, she began in her most professional voice. This is Dr. Sarah Chen speaking on behalf of the people of Earth. We received your message and found it very interesting. We have a few questions, if you don't mind. Could you possibly repeat some of the details about your empire? We want to make sure we write everything down correctly. She paused and smiled sweetly at the camera. We're new to this whole galactic diplomacy thing, so we want to make sure we understand everything properly before we respond. Thank you for your patience with us primitive beings. The transmission ended. Dr. Chen turned back to the room, where everyone was staring at her with expressions ranging from admiration to terror. Did you just mock them? Asked the Prime Minister. Not mock, Dr. Chen said. I was completely polite. I just asked them to repeat themselves because we want to be thorough. What's wrong with that? General Morrison was shaking his head, but he was also trying not to smile. Doctor, I think you just started humanity's first interstellar diplomatic incident. Good, said Dr. Chen cheerfully. I can't wait to see how they respond. Ambassador Kethvar was not used to questions. In his 300 years of diplomatic service to the Empire, no species had ever asked him to repeat himself. They usually just screamed, begged for mercy, or fainted. The human response was confusing and slightly annoying. He stood in the command center of his flagship, surrounded by junior officers who were all looking at him expectantly. The communication console was still showing the image of the small human female who had spoken to them. She had seemed almost cheerful. Admiral Zexai, Kethvar called to the military commander of the fleet. What do you make of this response? Admiral Zexai was a veteran of 47 conquests. He was larger than most Zarthul, with scars across his purple skin that showed his experience in battle. He studied the frozen image of Dr. Chen with his 3 eyes, trying to understand what he was seeing. Perhaps they are in shock, he suggested. Some species respond to overwhelming force with denial. Their minds cannot accept the reality of their situation. Or perhaps, said Commander Vextai, the intelligence officer, they are trying to buy time. This could be a stalling tactic while they prepare their defenses. Kethvar considered this. It was possible. The humans might be more clever than they appeared. Very well, he decided. We shall humor their request. Send them a detailed account of our military capabilities and conquest history. Let them understand the futility of resistance. The second transmission arrived on Earth 6 hours later. This time, Ambassador Kethvar was accompanied by Admiral Zexhai and several other alien officers. They had prepared what appeared to be a formal presentation, complete with holographic displays showing star maps and battle formations. Primitive, humans, Ambassador Kethvar began. You have requested information about the great hegemonic empire of Zarthul. We shall enlighten your inferior minds with knowledge of our glorious history. The presentation that followed was incredibly detailed and very, very boring. Admiral Zexhai explained their military doctrine, which seemed to involve flying ships in perfectly straight lines toward the enemy, firing energy weapons in coordinated volleys and maintaining strict formation at all times. He showed them diagrams of battle tactics that looked like they had been copied from a military textbook, written by someone who had never actually seen a battle. Dr. Chen and her team watched the entire 3-hour presentation in the Geneva Command Center. The world leaders had gone to get coffee after the first hour, but the scientists stayed to take notes. As the presentation went on, more and more of them started to look like they were trying not to laugh. Captain Rex Morrison, a military historian, who had been brought in to analyze the alien tactics, was taking very detailed notes. He had served in Afghanistan, Iraq, and the resource wars of the 2040s. He knew what real military thinking looked like, and this was not it. Are you seeing this? He whispered to Dr. Chen during a particularly ridiculous segment about honorable formation flying. I'm seeing it, but I'm not believing it, she whispered back. The aliens explained that their conquests typically took between 50 and 200 years per star system. They would arrive, present their demands, wait for surrender, and then spend decades establishing proper administrative control. If a species resisted, they would engage in formal combat according to strict rules that ensured minimal damage to infrastructure. We do not engage in the barbaric practices of irregular warfare, Admiral Zexhai said proudly. Our battles are conducted with honor and precision. Both sides maintain proper formations. Weapons are fired only during designated combat periods. Civilian populations are given adequate warning before any military action. Captain Morrison's pen stopped moving. He stared at the screen with his mouth slightly open. Did he just say they warn civilians before attacking? Whispered Professor Williams. And that they have scheduled battle times? Added Dr. Chen. The presentation continued. The aliens showed examples of their previous conquests, displaying images of the various species that had surrendered to the Empire. Every single one of them appeared to be either pre-industrial civilizations or highly advanced but completely peaceful societies. There were no images of actual space battles, no destroyed enemy ships, and no military casualties. The Andorian Resistance, Admiral Zexhai said, bringing up a new holographic display, was our most challenging conquest. They resisted our forces for nearly 2 full centuries before accepting the inevitable superiority of the Empire. The display showed what appeared to be a very polite space battle. The alien ships and the Andorian ships were flying in neat lines, taking turns shooting at each other with weapons that seemed designed to disable rather than destroy. It looked more like a sporting event than a war. Captain Morrison leaned over to Dr. Chen. I need to show you something, he said quietly. He pulled out his tablet and started calling up files from Earth's military history. Battle footage from World War II. Tactical analyses from the Vietnam War. Combat recordings from recent conflicts in Africa and South America. Images of destroyed cities, burned forests, and battlefields covered with debris. Look at this, he said, showing her a video of urban combat in Damascus. This is what war actually looks like. On the screen, soldiers were moving through destroyed buildings, using cover, coordinating attacks from multiple directions, and adapting their tactics in real time as the situation changed. It was chaotic, brutal, and completely unlike anything the aliens had shown them. Now look at this, Captain Morrison said, switching to a recording of a naval battle from World War II. Ships were maneuvering wildly, trying to avoid enemy fire while positioning themselves for attacks. Explosions lit up the ocean. Planes dove out of the sky like angry wasps. Dr. Chen stared at the 2 videos, then looked back at the alien presentation, where Admiral Zexhai was still explaining the proper procedures for requesting surrender terms from defeated enemies. Oh my God, she said softly. They've never actually been in a real war. Not once, Captain Morrison confirmed. Look at their casualty reports. In 200 years of fighting the Andorians, they lost a total of 37 soldiers. We lost more people than that in single battles that lasted less than a day. The alien presentation finally ended. Ambassador Kethvar returned to the screen looking very pleased with himself. Now you understand the mighty power of the hegemonic empire, he said. Surely you can see that resistance is futile. No species has ever successfully opposed our forces. Dr. Chen looked around the command center. The world leaders had returned and were listening with serious expressions, but the military officers and scientists were all looking at each other with the same expression, the same barely controlled amusement. She activated the return transmission. Thank you, Ambassador Kethvar, she said politely. That was very educational. We have a much better understanding of your military capabilities now. She paused, as if thinking carefully about her next words. We were wondering if you might be interested in seeing some examples of human military history. You know, just for cultural exchange purposes, we think you might find our approach to warfare interesting. Behind her, Captain Morrison was already setting up his presentation files. His expression was that of a professional poker player who had just been dealt 4 aces. Ambassador Kethvar looked pleased. We would be honored to observe the primitive military customs of your species. It will help us understand your level of development. Wonderful, said Dr. Chen, still smiling that innocent smile. Captain Morrison will handle this presentation. I think you'll find it very informative. She stepped aside and let Captain Morrison take her place at the communication console. He looked directly into the camera with the expression of a man who was about to give the most important military briefing of his life. Greetings, Admiral HFY, he said in his gravelly military voice. I'm Captain Rex Morrison, formerly of the United States Army Rangers, veteran of 7 combat deployments across 4 different wars. I understand you're interested in human military doctrine. He smiled, and it was not a nice smile. Well, let me tell you about a little thing we call combined arms warfare, and irregular tactics, and something we humans like to call total war. Behind him, Dr. Chen was already reaching for her phone to call the Secretary General. She had a feeling they were going to need to schedule a lot more meetings very soon. Captain Morrison's presentation lasted 8 hours. The aliens watched every minute of it without interruption, their 3 eyes growing wider with each passing hour. By the end, Admiral HFY looked like he had seen something that violated the laws of physics. The presentation had started with ancient human warfare. Morrison showed them footage of Roman legions, medieval sieges, and Mongol cavalry charges. Then he moved through the centuries, showing how human military thinking had evolved. Gunpowder, artillery, naval warfare. The development of tactics that prioritized winning over looking impressive. This is what we call the Napoleonic Wars, Morrison explained, showing maps of Europe covered in arrows indicating troop movements. Notice how the armies don't stand in straight lines shooting at each other. They maneuver. They try to gain advantages. They use terrain. Then came the World Wars. The aliens watched in stunned silence as Morrison showed them footage of aerial bombardments, submarine warfare, and tank battles. They saw images of factories converted to weapons production, civilian populations mobilized for war efforts, and entire continents turned into battlefields. This is total war, Morrison explained. When humans fight, we use everything. There are no rules about honor or fair play. There are no scheduled battle times. We fight to win, and we adapt our tactics based on what works. Admiral HFY had stopped taking notes. He was just staring at the screen with an expression of growing horror. The presentation moved into modern warfare. Guerrilla tactics in Vietnam, urban combat in Iraq, cyber warfare, drone strikes, special operations that violated every concept of honorable battle the aliens understood. Wait, Admiral HFY interrupted for the first time. You attack without warning? You target supply lines? You fight at night? Of course, Morrison said as if this was the most obvious thing in the world. Why would we warn the enemy we're coming? Why would we let them keep their supplies? And night provides excellent cover for operations. But that's not civilized, stammered Commander HFY. Where is the honor? Where is the proper protocol? Morrison looked genuinely confused. Honor doesn't win wars, Commander. Strategy wins wars. Tactics win wars. Adapting to circumstances wins wars. He pulled up a tactical analysis of a recent peacekeeping operation in Africa. This engagement lasted 6 hours. We were outnumbered 3-1, but we won because we used superior positioning, electronic warfare, and coordinated air support. The enemy never knew what hit them. 6 hours? Admiral HFY whispered. You won a battle in 6 hours? That was a long one, Morrison said casually. Most modern engagements are over in minutes or hours, not years or decades. Ambassador Kethvar, who had been silent throughout most of the presentation, finally spoke up. Surely you cannot sustain such intensive combat for extended periods. Your forces must require lengthy recovery times between engagements. Morrison laughed. Ambassador, let me tell you about World War II. We fought on 6 continents simultaneously for 6 years. We produced new weapons, trained new soldiers, and adapted new tactics continuously throughout the entire conflict. The war ended when our enemies simply couldn't fight anymore. He switched to a map showing global military operations during the war. Red arrows showed battles happening in Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, all at the same time. We were fighting in the frozen forests of Russia, the deserts of North Africa, the jungles of Southeast Asia, and the islands of the Pacific, all while developing atomic weapons and breaking enemy codes. Simultaneously. The alien command center was completely silent. Every officer was staring at the transmission with expressions ranging from disbelief to terror. This is impossible, whispered Admiral HFY. No species can maintain such complex operations across multiple theaters of war. Would you like me to explain our logistics networks? Morrison asked helpfully. Or our command and control systems? Or maybe our intelligence gathering methods? No, Admiral HFY said quickly. No, that will not be necessary. Morrison nodded and continued to the final part of his presentation. Theoretical space warfare. He showed the aliens computer simulations that the human military had developed for potential future conflicts. Ships that could change course rapidly. Tactics that involved using asteroids as cover. Electronic warfare that could disable enemy communications. Coordinated attacks from multiple directions. Of course, this is all theoretical, Morrison said. We've never actually fought a space battle. But our military planners have developed these concepts based on our experience with warfare in other environments. The simulations showed human ships moving in seemingly random patterns, appearing and disappearing behind space debris, launching attacks from unexpected angles, and coordinating with ground-based forces on planets and moons. Admiral HFY watched a simulation where human ships used a planet's gravity well to slingshot around and attack an enemy fleet from behind. The maneuver was completed in less than an hour. That's not possible, he said. Fleet movements require careful planning and coordination. You cannot simply improvise tactics during battle. Why not? Morrison asked. We do it all the time. Battlefield adaptation is one of the first things we teach our officers. No plan survives contact with the enemy, so you have to be ready to change your approach based on what actually happens. Commander HFY was frantically taking notes. But how do you coordinate such complex maneuvers without extensive preparation? How do your subordinate commanders know what to do? Morrison smiled. Training, Commander. We train our people to think, not just follow orders. A human sergeant can make tactical decisions that might require approval from high command in your military. We push decision-making down to the lowest level possible. The presentation ended with Morrison showing them Earth's current military capabilities. Not weapons or ship designs, but organizational structures. Command flexibility, training methods, the human ability to learn from mistakes and adapt quickly to new situations. This concludes our basic overview of human military doctrine, Morrison said. I hope it's been educational. Ambassador Kethvar stared at the screen for a long moment before responding. Captain Morrison, may I ask you a direct question? Of course. In your professional opinion, how would human forces perform against our fleet? Morrison considered the question seriously. He looked at his notes, thought about what he had learned from the alien's own presentation, and then looked directly into the camera. Honestly, Ambassador, I think it would be over before you knew we were fighting. Your formations are too rigid, your tactics are too predictable, and your command structure is too inflexible. You fight like you're putting on a show, not like you're trying to win. He paused and added, But I could be wrong. Theoretical analysis is no substitute for actual experience. Would you be interested in a demonstration? The alien command center erupted in surprised chatter. Officers were talking rapidly in their own language, gesturing with multiple arms, and looking back and forth between their commanders and the human transmission. Admiral HFY held up one of his hands for silence. When the noise died down, he looked directly at Morrison with an expression that might have been respect or might have been fear. "What kind of demonstration did you have in mind, Captain?" Morrison's smile became wider and significantly less friendly. "War games, Admiral. Nothing deadly. Just a friendly competition between your fleet and whatever we can put together. First side to disable the other side's flagship wins. No permanent damage, no casualties, just a practical test of tactical doctrine." He leaned forward slightly. "Unless, of course, you think the outcome would be too predictable." Admiral HFY's three eyes narrowed. In his 4 centuries of military service, no one had ever challenged the tactical superiority of the Empire. The suggestion that humans might actually pose a threat was both insulting and impossible. "Very well, Captain Morrison," he said coldly. "We accept your challenge. Prepare your forces. In 72 hours, we will demonstrate why the Empire has never lost a battle." Morrison nodded politely. "Looking forward to it, Admiral. This should be fun." The transmission ended. In the alien command center, Admiral HFY turned to his officers with complete confidence. "Begin preparations for the demonstration," he ordered. "These humans need to learn their place in the galactic order." In the Geneva Command Center, Captain Morrison was already on the phone with Fleet Command. "Yes, sir, I know we don't have a space navy," he was saying, "but I've got an idea about that. How quickly can we retrofit some mining ships?" The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter had never seen anything like what was happening now. 2 fleets faced each other across the void, but they could not have been more different. The Imperial fleet of the Zarthul hung in perfect formation, 12 massive warships arranged in a geometric pattern that had been used for centuries. Each ship was a work of art, covered in decorative armor and gleaming weapons. They moved slowly and majestically, maintaining precise distances from each other. Admiral HFY's flagship, the Eternal Glory, led the formation from the center, its weapons charged and ready for the demonstration that would put these upstart humans in their place. The human fleet was a mess. Admiral Torres, hastily promoted from the command of the Mars shipping routes, looked at her ragtag collection of vessels and wondered if Captain Morrison had lost his mind. She had 3 actual military spacecraft, all of them small patrol boats designed for asteroid mining security. The rest of her fleet consisted of mining ships, research vessels, a tourist transport, and 1 deep space garbage hauler that someone had painted with military markings as a joke. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Peterson from the communications station, "the aliens are requesting our fleet composition for the record." Torres looked at her list and sighed. "Tell them we have, let's see, 15 vessels of various classifications. That should sound properly vague." She didn't mention that most of her ships were held together with spare parts and hope. The rules of engagement had been negotiated carefully. No live weapons, only electronic warfare and disabling attacks. The goal was to disable the other side's flagship. Both fleets would use their own sensors to determine hits and damage. It was meant to be a civilized demonstration of military capability. Admiral HFY opened the official communication channel. "Human fleet, this is Admiral HFY of the Imperial Navy. We are prepared to begin the demonstration. We trust you will learn much from observing proper military doctrine." "Copy that, Admiral," Torres replied cheerfully. "We're ready when you are. This should be interesting." The demonstration began with both fleets moving toward each other across the asteroid field. The Imperial ships maintained their perfect formation, advancing in a straight line with weapons powered and shields at maximum. It was an impressive sight, exactly the kind of overwhelming display of force that had convinced hundreds of other species to surrender without a fight. The human ships immediately disappeared. Admiral HFY stared at his sensors in confusion. One moment the human fleet had been visible on his screens, and the next moment they were gone. Not destroyed, not retreating, just gone. "Commander Vextai," he called to his sensor officer. "Where are the human ships?" "I don't know, sir," Vextai replied, his voice puzzled. "They appear to have scattered into the asteroid field. Our sensors are detecting engine signatures from multiple directions, but we cannot get clear readings." This was not how demonstrations were supposed to work. In proper military exercises, both sides maintained visual contact and exchanged fire in an orderly fashion. You didn't hide behind rocks like some kind of space pirate. This is highly irregular, Admiral ZXHY muttered. Do they expect us to chase them through the asteroids like common criminals? Sir, called the communications officer, we're receiving a transmission from the humans. Put it through. Admiral Torres's voice came across the channel, and she sounded almost apologetic. Admiral ZXHY, we're having some minor technical difficulties with our formation keeping. Could you give us a few minutes to sort ourselves out? Admiral ZXHY looked around his command center. His officers were all looking back at him expectantly. The proper response was to grant the humans time to organize themselves into a respectable formation for the demonstration. Very well, he said. We shall wait for you to prepare your forces properly. Thanks, Admiral. We really appreciate your patience. Just give us a few more minutes. What Admiral ZXHY didn't know was that Admiral Torres was currently hiding her flagship behind a large asteroid while 3 mining ships used their industrial equipment to quietly attach magnetic charges to the hull of the Eternal Glory. The technical difficulties were actually a carefully coordinated stealth approach that had taken the human ships through the asteroid field in a pattern that kept them hidden from Imperial sensors. Peterson, Torres whispered into her communicator. Are the mining ships in position? Yes, ma'am. They've attached the charges and are moving to secondary positions. Excellent. What about the research vessels? They've deployed the sensor drones throughout the field. We now have complete coverage of Imperial ship movements. Torres smiled. While the aliens had been waiting politely for the humans to get organized, her fleet had turned the entire asteroid field into a 3-dimensional battlefield under human control. All right, people, she said into the fleet communication channel. Phase 1 is complete. Moving to Phase 2. Remember, we want to disable their flagship, not embarrass them too badly. Aboard the Eternal Glory, Admiral ZXHY was growing impatient. How much longer do these humans require to form a proper battle line? Sir, Commander Vextai said suddenly, I'm detecting some kind of electronic interference. Our long-range sensors are experiencing intermittent malfunctions. At the same moment, the ship's lights flickered. In the engine room, several control systems displayed error messages that the engineering staff had never seen before. What was that? Admiral ZXHY demanded. Unknown, sir. Possibly some kind of electromagnetic field generated by the asteroids. What he didn't know was that the research vessel Carl Sagan had just activated an electronic warfare package that was originally designed for jamming asteroid mining equipment. The package was now systematically interfering with Imperial communications and sensor systems. Admiral, came Torres's voice over the communication channel. We're ready to begin now. Thank you for your patience. Finally, Admiral ZXHY muttered. Very well, human fleet. Prepare to observe proper military tactics. He gave the order for his ships to resume their advance. The Imperial fleet moved forward in perfect formation, weapons charged, ready to demonstrate their overwhelming superiority. They expected to see the human ships arranged in some crude approximation of a battle line, probably hiding behind a few asteroids. Instead, chaos erupted from every direction at once. The first attack came from above, where 2 mining ships had positioned themselves on the far side of a large asteroid. They used their industrial cutting lasers to slice through the Eternal Glory sensor array, blinding the flagship's long-range detection systems. The second attack came from below, where the garbage hauler Lucky Strike had somehow managed to position itself directly underneath the Imperial formation. It released a cloud of metallic debris that interfered with the aliens' targeting systems. The third attack came from the left flank, where 3 patrol boats were darting between asteroids like angry wasps, targeting the Imperial escort ships with precise shots that disabled their weapons without causing serious damage. Admiral ZXHY spun around his command center, trying to track the attacks that seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. Where are they? How many ships do they have? I count 15 confirmed contacts, sir, Commander Vextai reported. No, wait, 20. They keep appearing and disappearing. The truth was that the human ships were using the asteroids as cover, appearing just long enough to take a shot before disappearing again. They moved in patterns that made no sense to Imperial tactical doctrine, coordinating attacks through a communication network that the aliens couldn't intercept. Sir, called the engineering officer, We're detecting some kind of attachment to our hull. Multiple contacts. Admiral Zexhai felt the first cold touch of real fear. Attachments? What kind of attachments? Unknown, sir. They appear to be magnetic devices of some kind. Those were the charges that the mining ships had placed during the technical difficulties phase. They weren't explosive, just magnetic clamps attached to electronic devices that were now systematically shutting down the Eternal Glory's systems. The main lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the command center in red. Half the control panel stopped working. The artificial gravity fluctuated, making everyone grab onto something solid. "Sir," Commander Vextai said, his voice barely steady, "we're losing primary systems across the ship. Engine control is intermittent. Weapons are offline. Communications are down to emergency channels only." Admiral Zexhai stared at the tactical display, which was showing error messages instead of ship positions. In the space of 10 minutes, his flagship had been systematically disabled by an enemy that he still couldn't see properly. "How is this possible?" he whispered. The answer came from Admiral Torres, whose voice suddenly came through the emergency communication channel with perfect clarity. "Admiral Zexhai, this is Admiral Torres. I'm afraid your flagship has been disabled. According to our sensors, you've lost primary power, weapons, engines, and most of your sensor array. Under the rules of engagement, this constitutes mission completion." Admiral Zexhai looked around his darkened command center. His officers were staring at him with expressions of shock and confusion. Outside the viewports, he could see human ships emerging from behind asteroids like ghosts becoming solid. "How?" he asked finally. 3 days after the demonstration, Ambassador Kethavar sat in the human diplomatic facility on Earth's moon, staring at a cup of something the humans called coffee. Dr. Chen had explained that it was a mild stimulant drink, but to Kethavar it tasted like liquid anxiety, which was appropriate, because anxiety was exactly what he was feeling. Across the table from him sat Dr. Chen, Captain Morrison, and Admiral Torres. They had been talking for hours, and every hour had brought new revelations that shook Kethavar's understanding of the universe. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Kethavar said slowly. "Your species has been at war with itself for your entire recorded history?" "Pretty much," Dr. Chen confirmed. "We've had brief periods of peace, but they never lasted very long. There's always been someone fighting someone else somewhere on our planet. And you consider this normal?" Captain Morrison leaned back in his chair. "Ambassador, conflict drives innovation. Competition makes us stronger. Every war we've fought has taught us something new about tactics, technology, or organization. We learn from our mistakes and adapt." Kethavar's 3 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep confusion among his people. "But surely such constant warfare would destroy your civilization. How do you maintain social order? How do you advance technologically?" "We do both at the same time," Admiral Torres explained. "During World War II, we developed jet engines, radar, computers, and atomic energy. The pressure of war forced us to innovate faster than we ever had before." Dr. Chen pulled up a holographic display showing human technological development over time. "Look at this progression, Ambassador. Every major leap forward in human technology has coincided with either a war or the threat of war. Competition drives us to be better." Kethavar studied the display with growing amazement. The humans had gone from riding animals to flying through space in less than a century. The Zarthul had taken 10,000 years to achieve the same level of technological advancement. "This is impossible," he muttered. "How can a species develop so rapidly while simultaneously fighting constant wars?" "Because we don't fight constant wars," Morrison explained. "We fight many small wars. Different groups, different regions, different time periods. Each conflict teaches us something new, but it doesn't destroy our entire civilization." Admiral Torres nodded. "Plus, we compete with each other even during peacetime. Different nations, different corporations, different military services. We're always trying to outdo each other. But the Empire," Kethavar said desperately, "has maintained peace and order for over 5,000 years. Surely that is superior to your chaotic approach." Dr. Chen looked at him with something that might have been sympathy. "Ambassador, can I ask you something? In those 5,000 years of peace, how much has your technology advanced? How much have your tactics improved? How much has your society changed?" Kethavar opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. The truth was that Imperial technology had remained essentially the same for millennia. Their military doctrine hadn't changed since the founding of the Empire. Their society was stable because nothing ever changed. "We have achieved perfect order," he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. "You've achieved stagnation," Morrison said bluntly. "Without challenges, without competition, without the need to adapt and improve, you've stopped growing. That's why 847 star systems sounds impressive until you realize you've been expanding for 5,000 years. Admiral Torres leaned forward. "Ambassador, how many of those 847 systems did your people actually conquer through military action?" Kethavar hesitated. Our definition of conquest includes peaceful subjugation of inferior species who recognize our obvious superiority. How many actual wars?" Torres pressed. "The Andorian resistance lasted 2 centuries. That's one. How many others?" Kethavar was quiet for a long moment. "The Viridian conflict lasted 130 years. The Outer Rim disputes took nearly 3 centuries to resolve. So 3 real wars in 5,000 years, Morrison said. And they all took centuries to complete because you don't know how to fight efficiently." The silence stretched out as Kethavar absorbed this. Everything he had believed about the Empire's military superiority was crumbling. They weren't great conquerors, they were just bullies who had never met anyone who could fight back. "But surely," he said desperately, "our administrative capabilities, our organizational structures, are probably very good," Dr. Chen interrupted kindly. "Ambassador, we're not saying the Empire is worthless. We're saying it's specialized for different things than fighting wars." She pulled up another display, this one showing the structure of the Imperial government. "Look at this. You've created a stable administrative system that can govern hundreds of different species across vast distances. That's incredibly impressive. We couldn't do that." Kethavar looked up hopefully. "You couldn't?" "Not a chance," Admiral Torres confirmed. "Humans are terrible at large-scale cooperation. We can work together when we have to, but we prefer competition to collaboration. Our longest-lasting political unions have maybe a few hundred years of history. You've maintained a single government for 5 millennia. Captain Morrison nodded. "Different strengths, Ambassador. You're good at organization and administration. We're good at fighting and innovation. Both have their place." Kethavar felt something he had never experienced before, hope mixed with terror. "What are you suggesting?" Dr. Chen smiled. "We're suggesting that maybe the galaxy is big enough for both approaches, and maybe there are threats out there that neither of us could handle alone." She changed the display to show a star map of the local galactic region. "You mentioned that the Empire controls 847 systems. How many inhabited systems are there in the galaxy?" "Estimates suggest approximately 400,000, Kethavar said automatically. "So you control about 0.2% of the galaxy. What about the other 99.8%? Kethavar stared at the map. The Empire's territory was a tiny cluster of stars in a vast ocean of unknown space. For the first time in his life, he realized how small they actually were. "There could be other species out there," Admiral Torres said quietly. "Species that have been fighting each other for as long as we have. Species that have developed along different paths than either humans or the Zarthul. Species that might not be as reasonable as we are," Morrison added. The implications hit Kethavar like a physical blow. If humans could dismantle an Imperial fleet in 10 minutes using mining ships and garbage haulers, what could a truly militaristic alien species do? What if there were civilizations out there that made humans look peaceful? "What do you propose?" he asked. Dr. Chen leaned forward. "An alliance, Ambassador. Not conquest, not subjugation, not empire expansion. A partnership between equals. You could provide the administrative framework and long-term stability," Torres explained. "We could provide military innovation and tactical flexibility. Together," Morrison said, "we could explore the rest of the galaxy and be prepared for whatever we find out there." Kethavar considered this. It went against everything the Empire stood for. They didn't make alliances with inferior species. They conquered and administered. But after seeing what humans could do with improvised tactics and civilian ships, he was no longer certain who was inferior to whom. "The Council of Conquest would never approve such an arrangement," he said slowly. "Then maybe it's time for a Council of Cooperation," Dr. Chen suggested. 6 months later, the first joint human Imperial exploration fleet departed for the outer rim of the galaxy. The ships were a mixture of human innovation and imperial engineering, crewed by mixed teams who were still learning to work together. Admiral Torres commanded the military components, while Imperial Admiral Zexhai handled logistics and long-range planning. The first alien species they encountered was the Kethmoran Empire, a civilization that had been locked in a civil war for 8,000 years. Their technology was advanced, their tactics were brutal, and they had never heard of concepts like surrender or negotiation. The joint fleet's first battle lasted 6 hours. The Kethmoran forces, despite having superior ships and weapons, were completely overwhelmed by the combination of human tactical flexibility and imperial organizational efficiency. When the surviving Kethmoran commanders were brought aboard the flagship for surrender negotiations, they kept asking the same question: how did you coordinate such complex maneuvers across so many ships without proper chain of command protocols? Admiral Torres and Admiral Zexhai looked at each other and smiled. "Let us tell you about something we call combined arms doctrine," Torres said. "And perhaps you would be interested in joining our little alliance," Zexhai added. Dr. Chen, monitoring the conversation from Earth, made a note in her journal. First Contact Protocol 3.0. When meeting new alien species, first determine if they're reasonable. If they are, offer partnership. If they're not, introduce them to human military doctrine until they become reasonable. Results: surprisingly effective. She paused and added a final note. Note to self: the galaxy is apparently full of species that have never learned how to fight properly. This is either very good news or very bad news. Possibly both.